All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. Start by thanking our sponsors. I thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Cheshvan, Yoel and Sarah Kelman, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos this month in appreciation of all of the Torah that comes from the Kehillah. Our Day of Learning sponsors, Moshe Ben Zion and Judy Pacino, in commemoration of the 4th yard site of Moshe Ben Zion's father, Baruch Simcha Ben Yaakov. May his neshama continue to reach the highest levels of Shamayim. May the family have a nechama. Thank you very much for the sponsorship. So we'll say with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Pei Zayin 87. We have a lot to do today, Meretz Hashem. And we are picking up on the bottom of Pei Vav Amud Beis. We're actually going to pick up with the words V'im Tomar. It is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 lines up from the bottom. So we'll say, remember again, we left off actually with an interesting story just to give a bit more context. So remember again, we were dealing in the Mishnah with the case of the bar sheben shtei chatzeros, right? The case of the water cistern in between two chatzeros, and what you do in order to go ahead and be able to draw water from that bar on Shabbos. So we'll say, remember again, we had a whole discussion about a mechitza, right? What type of mechitza, what type of partition do you need in the water? We were now focusing in the end on the position of Rabbi Yehuda. So remember again, Rabbi Yehuda said, why do you need a partition? After all, again, remember, there is already a mechitza, there is already a wall in between these two chatzeros, and Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion, essentially, we could view the wall as extending downwards, and that divides the well. There is no need, or that divides the bar. There is no need for an additional partition. So what's the Gemara say? Oh, that's very interesting. It must be that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi espouses a very similar shita by Sukkah. And Rabbi Yossi, interestingly enough, holds that halacha l'maaseh, if you build a wall from top down, as long as that wall extends 10 tefachim, we could view that wall as extending all the way down. We then went on to show that not necessarily. Rabbi Yehuda stating his shita by Shabbos, Rabbi Yossi stating his shita by Sukkah, and they may not actually agree with one another. So the Gemara says as follows: V'im Tomar. Maybe you'll say Osa Ma'aseh Shenaseh B'Tzipori Api Minaseh. So maybe you'll say, well, what about the story of Tzipori? Now we'll see what the story is in just a moment. Who did the people of Tzipori conduct themselves in accordance with? Lo api Rabbi Yossi, Ela api Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. To which the Gemara says they didn't conduct themselves based on Rabbi Yossi, rather they conducted themselves based on the psak of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says, what happened? First of all, just you should know, interestingly enough, the Gemara says over here that Rabbi Yossi was the Rav of Tzipori. He was the Rav of Tzipori. But apparently the story that we're about to read happened after he died, and the halacha was decided by his son, Rabbi Shmuel Yossi. We'll say what happened. When Rav Dimi came along, he said as follows: Pam achas shachachu v'lo hiviu sefer Torah min ba'od yom. This is actually very interesting. So one time, apparently, they did not go ahead and bring the sefer Torah to shul. So I guess whatever the mitzias was, the sefer Torah wasn't always kept in the shul. So we'll say, so first of all, that sounds like that may have happened more often than not, because often Batei Knesios were located in the fields. So you didn't necessarily want to leave a Sefer Torah in an unprotected area. So what happened? So normally Erev Shabbos, somebody would bring the Sefer Torah to shul. Well, it happened one Shabbos, they forgot to bring the Sefer Torah to shul. So the Sefer Torah, Rashi points out, was in a different chutzner. So what happened? We'll say the problem was, there was no Eruv in between the chutzner and the Beis HaKnesses. So what did they do? The Gemara says, Lamachar on Shabbos, Parsu Sadin Al Ha'emudim. What they did is, we'll say, they put a sheet, right? They draped a sheet across a number of poles. They view Sefer Torah v'karubo, and they brought the Sefer Torah down, and therefore they laned. So we'll say, essentially what they did is, they made partitions by going ahead and attaching sheets to poles. Well, we'll say, but as Rashi points out over here, this was a case of mechitza teluya. In other words, the sheets did not reach all the way to the ground. Rather, the sheets were suspended some amount above the ground. But yet they essentially made this corridor. They made this walled area between the shul and between the chutzner and carried the Torah like that. To which the Gemara says, what? Parsu lechatchila. So the Gemara says they made this on Shabbos. The Gemara says, Mishari, is that permitted? Vaha hakomodim she'en osin ohel harai b'Shabbos. Let's say 1 second. Everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, you cannot make a temporary structure on Shabbos. So I must say, forget about, right now the machlokas we were dealing with beforehand was if you have what we call a suspended partition, a mechitza teluya, does that work on Shabbos or not? But that is all presupposing that mechitza teluya was there when? Already before Shabbos. No one is sanctioning the creation of an actual mechitza on Shabbos. I won't say that's part of the, at least the rabbinic prohibition of building. Rather, says the Gemara, Ela mazu sadinim perusin ala amudim ve'aviyu sefer Torah v'karbo. No, so you're right. Rather, what the story was as follows. It's not that they went ahead and erected these partitions. Rather, again, they were there already from before Shabbos. They were there already from before Shabbos. It's just that, again, they ended up utilizing them over the course of Shabbos. So the Gemara says, so I will say, so therefore the Gemara is just pointing out, so again, they was there already before Shabbos, and they relied on the psak of Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi. Fine. So we'll say the reason why it's not Rabbi Yossi or Rabbi Yehuda is that, not like Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yossi only stated his shita lagabe sukkah. Because remember again, as the Gemara said before, sukkah is an isser asay. Right? The worst case scenario if you don't eat in a sukkah is that halacha l'maisa you have negated a positive commandment. Whereas Rabbi Yossi was concerned about allowing this on Shabbos because Shabbos carries with it an isser skila. And even though, again, the topic we're discussing has nothing to do with skila, but the parsha of Shabbos is one that is subject to skila, therefore Rabbi Yossi felt concerned about allowing a mechitza to a suspended partition. The Gemara just pointed out this story that happened in Tzipori, Rabbi Yossi had already passed away. And it was his son, Rabbi Yossi, who allowed. Good. Amrabba, Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Chanina, Amrabba, Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya, Amru Davar Echad. So Rabbi says Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya both said the same thing. We'll say, in other words, that they both were makel when it comes to water. So we'll say this was something that we introduced on the top of the days of yesterday's daf. This concept that the laws of mechitza vis-a-vis water are going to be more makel than the laws of mechitza in general. A very important yesod. So both Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya both agreed with this concept. Rabbi Huda hada amra. So we'll say Rabbi Huda we said before, right? So what's Rabbi Huda's kula? Rabbi Huda's kula is that if you have two chatzeros, a wall between them, and in between those two chatzeros is a bar, a water pit, Rabbi Huda holds that the wall that runs across the two chatzeros and above the water pit is enough to serve as a mechitza, is viewed as extending downwards into the water pit, and each chatzer could draw water from their side of the water pit. That was Rabbi Yehuda's kula when it comes to water. We need not create a brand new mechitza. What's Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya? Here we go. Omer, it was a very interesting case. Omer gustra sheyesh ba arba amos al arba amos. If you have a balcony. So we'll say this is our case of the balcony which extends over the water. If you have a balcony which is dalet amos by dalet amos, chokek ba dalet al dalet umemale. You could go ahead and saying what? Essentially carve out a piece in the middle that is dalet al dalet and go ahead and fill up water like that. So we'll say, if you're following along in the pictures, so this is picture 298. Picture 298. So I both say, what we're going to see over here, the chiddush of Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya is as follows. Remember, when we spoke about the concept of mechitza, we spoke about this concept already beforehand, right? This gustera case, where you go ahead and essentially you hollow out of your gustera. You have a gustera that's 4 amas by 4 amas. So what do you need to do? You need to go ahead and hollow out a hole that is 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, right? And remember again, what you do is you make some walls on it. You make some walls on that hole, right? Normally the way we've seen it before, you've seen this picture before. The way it normally looks is you make just if you have any of the previous pictures, I don't know if you still have them, but like if you look back at picture 282 or 283 or 284, which was on Daf Pei Daled 84, back. So remember again, you make the hole in the balcony, you build a little box, so you need a 4 tefach by 4 tefach hole. You build a little box with some walls, and what happens? We view those walls as if they extend downwards into the water, creating a mechitza through which you are permitted to go ahead and draw water. I will say Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia is coming and he's introducing even a new chiddush. He says, all you need to do is go ahead and make a hole. And I will say what we could imagine is as follows. We could imagine the rest of the gustera as being folded down, being bent down, and forming walls along that hole. The concept of kafuf. This idea, so we'll say, so Rabbi Hananya is introducing two things. So the chiddush normally with gustera was the idea that what? You could make a hole of dalet tfachim by dalet tfachim and put some walls along that hole. And we view those walls, good asik mechitzta, right? We view those walls as if they extend down to the water. Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia is now taking that even further. He's saying you don't even need to make walls. But as long as you have a gustera that has dimensions of at least dalet amas by dalet amas, and then you make a hole that is dalet tfachim by dalet tfachim, we view the rest of the gustera as if it bends downwards, forming walls along the hole. So we'll say that's if you look again at picture 298. No, not 290. 298. 298. Yeah, that's the. If you look at 298, so we'll say that's what's happening over here. So that halacha l'maisa, you could see the sides of the wall. If we view the sides of the gustera as bending downwards and creating walls alongside the hole. So it says the Gemara, Amalei Abaye, v'dilma lohi, ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Yehuda hasam ela da'amar gud achis mechitzta, aval kuf v'gud lo. So we'll say, so first of all, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda might not agree with this. Why would Rabbi Yehuda agree with this? We'll say, see, understand that Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia's approach requires two concepts. Number one is the concept of kof. Kof means bend. We view the flat areas of the gustera as if they bend and form walls alongside the hole, and then use the concept of gud achis mechitzta to extend the walls downwards into the water. So we'll say that's using two principles, or two really halachos l'Moshe Sinai. So Rabbi Yehuda might say, listen, you could use one concept, you can't use two concepts. But furthermore, ad kan lo kam Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia hasam ela biyama shel Tveria. Furthermore, I will say Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia quoted this in a very specific context. He allowed you to go ahead and use this by the waters of Tveria. Ultimately, again, by the Kinneret. Hoil v'yesh la ognaim va'ayaros v'karfifos makifos osa. So you'll say, so apparently, again, by the banks of the Kinneret, or I should say by the Kinneret had very steep banks and also had habitation, had cities and karfifios around it. So because the waters of Tiberia almost had this natural type of mechisa anyway, between the steep banks, the cities, and the karfifios which were arranged around it, he allowed you to utilize this double kula of kof and good. Aval b'shar me'emos lo. But perhaps by other bodies of water, he would not allow you to be mekel. Okay, Amar Abaye. So Abaye now takes Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia a step further. So we'll say, so the simple case, so here's what we have. Both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia are mekel by water. We wanted to suggest that they would both agree with each other's kulas. All the Gemara is saying is, no, not necessarily. Because remember, Rabbi Yehuda's kula is a pretty simple one, that if you have a mechitza, if you have a mechitza, a partition wall that runs between two chatzeros, and that partition wall happens to run above a bar of water, you could just view the partition wall as extending downwards. That's it. Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia's kula is a bit more complicated. He has a gustera, that balcony that measures dalet amas by dalet amas. There's water underneath it. You want to draw water through the gustera. Up until now, what we would have done is we would have carved out a hole of dalet tfachim by dalet tfachim, built some walls underneath the gustera, underneath that hole, and view the walls as extending downwards, draw the water through that. Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia says, you don't even have to do that. We view the rest of the gustera as kof, as bending over and creating walls around the opening in the gustera. And so then the Gemara just says, by the way, Rabbi Yehuda and Hananya ben Akavia probably don't see eye to eye. Yes, it's true that they both have kulas in water, but lamaisa they may not agree with each other's kulas. Comes along Abaye, and Abaye now takes Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia a bit further. Abaye, Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia, If Rabbi say, if you had a gustera that was less than 3 tfachim from the wall, we'll say in this case it's the wall of the home. Arka Dalet Amos, the length of it has to be Dalet Amos. V'rochba achad asar umashahu, and the length has to be 11 amos and a bit. And I will say, with those dimensions, once again, you could say kof. So I will say, so again, if you want to follow this, so this is happening in picture 300. So you could see over here the different dimensions. Well, so all the Gemara is doing now is just utilizing different dimensions to show the principle of Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya, but the principle is always the same, that you could create a hole in the gustera. You need not create actual walls around that hole, because essentially what we could view is the rest of the gustera as bending and forming those walls along the hole. Next case, the Gemara says, Hai says a kufa, if ultimately again the board was upright by the home, there has to be 10 tfachim high, and has to be again 6 tfachim and 2 bits. If the board, so we'll say again, you can follow along in the pictures. What we just read over here was Haisa Zakufa. It's picture 302. So I'll say all it's just showing is different dimensions in different ways depending on how the gustera is arranged. That Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya's shita could ultimately unfold. Next, so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna B'Rei Rav Yoshua, Haisa when this Bekaren Zavis. What happens if the board was arranged in a corner? Ultimately, again, it has to have a height of 10 tfachim, a width of 2 tfachim and 2 bits. So we'll say that's picture 303. So the Gemara says, Va'alahad desanya, Rabbi Hananya ben Akavya Omer, Gustra sheish ba dalar amos ba dalar amos, chokik ba dalar al dalas umamali. I will say, but the case of the original case that we mentioned, that a gustra that's dalar amos by dalar amos, you make a hole of 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim and fill it up, heichim mishkachasla. So we'll say ultimately again, what's that case? Da'avida kiasusa. So we'll say ultimately again, Kiasisa literally means like a mortar. But I will say, if you look at picture 304, this actually means that the paradigmatic case, ultimately Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, 305, sorry. A paradigmatic case, Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, is actually when you make the gustera on 4 support beams. So we'll say, if you notice over here in this case, the gustera itself is not attached to the wall of the home, but rather the gustera is a freestanding structure. And in this case over here, because you don't have to deal with anything to do with the wall, that would be the paradigmatic case of Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. When I both say you could see. So you can see you have the hole in the middle. It's 4 amas by 4 amas is the entire platform. The hole itself is 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. And I both say, which you could see, this picture actually does it well. If you notice, the lighter areas on the top platform, the lighter areas there, ultimately those are the areas that we view as extending downwards. We bend over, and those are the areas that form the walls along the opening. Good. So I'll say, so all the Gemara was just explaining was another kula by water, the kula of Rabbi Yoshua ben Hananya. So I'll say just to close out the sugya. So ultimately, again, so we end off essentially with this machlokes between how you deal with a shared water bar, right? With a shared bar in between 2 chatzeros. And we saw that essentially it is a machlokes. It is a machlokes between Rabbi Yoshua, between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda really representing this view that when it comes to water, we are mekel with mechitzas. That what you normally need in order to satisfy the criteria of a mechitza does not apply by water. Does not apply by water. We see that in Rabbi Shua ben Chananya also shares this kula. So first of all, say in the kind of mechitza kula camp, you have Rabbi Yehuda, you have Rabbi Yossi, you have Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. Now ben Akavya, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya. So we'll say interestingly, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya and Rabbi Yehuda both espouse their particular shitos by Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi espouses his shita by Sukkah. It's not clear if Rabbi Yossi would extend his kulas to Shabbos, or maybe he just allowed his kulas to be stated vis-a-vis Sukkah. So we'll say, well, so good. So with that we close out the sugya. The truth is there is some interesting halacha lamaisa on this but I think we'll leave it because we're not finished. We're not finished with water yet. So let's see the next Mishnah, then we'll come back to the Shulchan Aruch. Take a look. Mishnah will say Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Amas Hamayim Shaveres B'Chatzar. So we'll say now we have an interesting case. In this case over here, a little bit different. Up until now, we were dealing with a shared water source that ran between two chatzeros. Now, we're dealing with one chatzar, and you have a channel of water. You have a stream that runs through one chatzar. So we'll say not shared chatzar, one chatzar. Amas mayim sheoveres bechatzar, ein memalan imena b'Shabbos. You saw both say the Mishnah says if you have a stream of water that runs through a chatzar, you cannot draw water from the stream on Shabbos. Ela imkin asula mechitza gava yutfachim bekniso biyitzia. So both say the Mishnah says if you have a stream that runs through a chatzar, the only way to draw water from the stream is if you have a mechitza at the entry and exit of the chatzar. So both say, so just very simple. So both say, so this is picture 308. No, I'm sorry, not 308, 306. 306. So both say, so you can see over here, you have the stream that runs through the chatzar. So again, I both say, even though, remember, the pashtos, there's already a wall. See, remember, we kind of make the assumption that chatzeros are normally walled. So there is already a wall over here on each end of the chatzar. The Mishnah seems to be indicating that halacha l'maisa, you have to put an additional mechitza underneath the wall, kind of enclosing the stream within the chatzar. Then you could go ahead and draw water from the stream on Shabbos. So you need an extra mechitza that's at least 10 tefachim bekniso ubiyitzia, at the entrance and at the exit of the chatzar. Once again, Rabbi Yehuda comes along. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kosel she'al gaba tido mishum mechitza. So it's the same Rabbi Yehuda as last Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, I don't understand. Why do you need another mechitza? You already have a wall. Just let the regular wall of the chatzar be viewed as extending downward into the water. And Shalom Yisrael. Omer Rabbi Yehuda, Maisa ba'ama shal Evel. There was a story where there was a Maisa with the stream in the city of Evel. So Evel apparently was a city, but they're referring to a specific chutzner in Evel. That's the name of the place. And Abba said they used to draw water from this stream on Shabbos. Abba said, obviously, if Rabbi Yehuda is quoting this, the reason he's quoting it is why? Is because halacha l'maisa, it must have been that although there was a wall that surrounded this city, there was no additional mechitza that went down past the wall into the water. So Rabbi Yehuda is bringing this as a raya that whenever you have a wall is enough to enclose a stream. To which the Gemara says, Amrulo, they said to him, they said to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not a raya. The reason ultimately, again, that they were able to draw water from that stream was because the stream did not possess the requisite shear. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. It's like in the middle of the wide lines in Rashi. Carmelis, omek yud oberach. Well, this is very important. Well, let's take a step back. If I have a stream that runs through a chatzar, so why can't I go ahead and draw water from that stream? The assumption that the Gemara is making over here is that we are dealing with a stream that is at least 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim deep. So a stream that is 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim deep has the status of a carmelis. In which case, if I was going ahead and drawing water from that on Shabbos, I would be transferring it either from a carmelis into my chatzar, which is a rishus hayochid. So Rabbi says, so therefore, what I need to do in order to be able to draw water is I need to transform that stream from a carmelis into a rishus hayochid. How do I do that? So essentially what I do is I enclose the stream. The machlokes is how do I enclose the stream? The Tanakama holds you need to make an additional mechitza that goes into the water underneath the already existing wall. Rabbi Yehuda says no, the wall is viewed as extending downwards and that encloses the stream. When Rabbi Yehuda tries to bring a raya from this stream in Evel, they tell Rabbi Yehuda that's not a raya. The reason why the elders permitted you to draw water from that stream in Evel was why? Because the water wasn't 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim deep. So I will say, if you have a stream that runs through a chatzar that's not 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim deep, everyone agrees that what? That you can draw water from it. Why not? Because it doesn't have the status of a carmelis. So it says the Gemara, let's analyze. Tanarabanan, asula b'knis v'lo asula b'yitzia. If you made a mechitza for the stream at the entrance of the chatzar, but you didn't do so at the exit, or asula b'yitzia v'lo asula b'knisa, or you made a mechitza at the exit but didn't make one at the entrance, ein b'malin mimehemena b'Shabbos ela imkein asila mechitza yotfachim biyitzia or b'knisa. So therefore, we'll say again, the Mishnah Gemara over here quoting a brayso that aligns with the Rabban Tanakama, the Mishnah. The only way to draw water from a stream which runs through a chutzner on Shabbos is to make a mechitza that is at least 10 tefachim high at the entrance and exit of the stream. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Kosel sha'al gaba tido mishum mechitza. Rabbi Yehuda says not true. You don't need to erect another partition. You don't need another mechitza. But since there's already a wall, we view the wall as extending down into the stream, and you could draw water from inside the chutzner. I'm Rabbi Yehuda. Maisa ba'amasayim shaisa be'eva. I'm sorry. Maisa ba'amasayim shaisa ba'ame'eva l'tzipori. There was once a story, or there was a maisa of a stream that went from the city of Avel to the city of Tzipori, and they would draw water from this stream. And Rabbi Yehuda has obviously quoted this story because the reason they were allowing water to be drawn from the stream is because they were relying on the wall that was already there to act as the mechitza. Amru lo misham raya. They said to Rabbi Yehuda, "Do you think that's a raya?" Libnei shelo haisamuka yutfachim v'roch badalid. The reason they allowed people to draw water from that stream was because the stream did not have the requisite shear of 4 tefachim of width and 10 tefachim of depth. If you don't have that shear, then the stream is not considered a carmelis. If the stream is not considered a carmelis, there is no problem to draw water from it. Good. But so that brayso pretty much just restated the Mishnah. Tanya idach. I have another brayso. What's the other brayso? Tanya idach. Amas hamayim ha'overes bein hachalonos. What's the interesting case? If you have a stream of water that runs in between the windows. We'll say, just to show you this case, this is picture 307. 307. Now we'll say, now the truth is, the better way to imagine this image is imagine homes on both sides of the stream. Right? So we'll say, in this case over here, what's unique about this case is none of the homes have access to the water through a doorway. Right, their only access is through the window. And you can see what they do is every home lowers out a bucket through the window. They draw water from the stream, or better stated, maybe from the channel. And they go out and they bring water into their home like that. So watch this. So amas hamayim ha'overes ben achalonos pachos migimel mishalshel delima male. If it's less than 3 tefachim, I will say it's not clear when it says if it is less than 3 tefachim what the it is. We'll define that in just a moment. If it's less than 3 tefachim, you could go ahead and lower your bucket, fill up water, and bring it back in your home. Gimel, but if it, whatever the it is 3 tefachim, you cannot lower your bucket in order to draw water. Reb Shimon says, Pachos midalid mishalshel delima male. Dalid ein mishalshel delima male. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees. He says, no. If it, whatever the it is 4 tefachim, then if it's less than 4 tefachim, you could lower the bucket and draw the water. But if it's more than 4 tefachim, you cannot go ahead and draw the water. So the Gemara says, "B'may askinon." When we say it, so we'll say, so there's a machlokes, right? There's a machlokes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. So the Rabbanan say if it is less than 3 tefachim, you could draw water. If it's more than 3 tefachim, you can't draw water. Shmuel says if it's more than 4 tefachim, you can't draw water. Less than 4 tefachim, you can draw water. Okay, what's the it? If you want to say that they're arguing about the size of the channel, the size of the stream, but so that can't be, because everyone agrees that in order for the waterway to be problematic, it has to be what? At least 4 tefachim in width and 10 tefachim in depth. That's the shear of a carmelis. No one disagrees with that. So the Gemara says, Ella ba'agafel. Oh, they both say when the it that they're referring to are the banks of the stream or the banks of the channel. That's agafel. So I will say that's you could see over here, it's still picture 307. It's the size of the banks. The size of the banks by the channel. So we'll say, watch this. It's actually quite interesting. Ula hachlif. And I will say, here's what's incredible. So I will say, watch this. This is incredible. So if you have, think about this just a moment. You have a home. The home is Rosh Hashanah. The water itself is a carmelis. So technically speaking, I can't draw water. Now, this is assuming, by the way, that in the particular chutzner in question, there is not a bona fide mechitza which encloses the chutzner. Because if there's a bona fide mechitza which encloses the chutzner, you could easily draw water. Let's assume there's no mechitza. I want to draw water from the channel into my home. The problem is that's transferring out from a karmelis to a sheyachid. But say, now watch this. What happens if in the middle, in between my home and the river, there's a makom p'tur? There's an exempted area. Suppose if there's an exempted area, then what could I technically do? I could draw water from the stream, place it down in the makom p'tur, and then go ahead and take it from the makom p'tur into my home, thereby avoiding any type of potential hotzah issues. So that's what it means, lahachlif. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, elabagafel lahachlif. Rashi says, diyesh ba'amashir kamlis, v'hacha b'sheisha agafayim gevoim, u'mahanim le'mehavi hanach agafayim makom p'tur. Kileslu rochav gimel u'meshashal nesadli u'manich al agafayim. Supposed to listen to this. So the machlok of seen the Rabbana and Rav Shimon Gamliel is the dimensions of a makom p'tur. According to the Rabbanan, in order to be a makom p'tur, the area must measure less than gimel tfachim. According to Rav Shimon Gamliel, the area could be up to 4 tfachim. That's what they're arguing about. The Rabbi say ultimately again the dimensions of, if you look at the Kamei Rabbanan Desu gimel rochav gimel sulav makom p'tur. Supposed to say that's the machlokes. Supposed to say it's really quite fascinating. So in this case over here, I need to get water from the stream into my house. The problem is I can't because Lamaisa, the stream is karmelis, mamzer sheyachid. Oh, but if the banks could potentially act as a makom p'tur, I could rest the bucket for a moment in the banks. So therefore, the bucket goes from the river to the banks to my home, or vice versa, from my home to the banks to the river, and that could be totally okay. So then the machlokis is, what are the dimensions of a makom p'tur? According to the Rabbanan, a makom p'tur is any area less than gimel tfachim. According to Rav Shimon Gamliel, it's any area less than dalid tfachim. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Rav Shimon Gamliel Omar pachos mi dalid mishalshel d'li umamali. So Rav Shimon Gamliel says, if the banks of the river are less than dalid tfachim, that's a makom p'tur. Therefore, you can go ahead and lower the bucket from your home to the banks, then again from the banks to the river, then from the river to the banks, and from the banks back to my home. Dalit ein mashashad limamali. So also the Gemara says, "B'mayaskin." What are we dealing with over here? Gufa. So ultimately, again, if you think we're dealing with the channel itself, ve'alahadichi asrav dimi amra b'yochanan ein karmelis pechusa midalit lema kitanai. I'm trying to elabag ve'alahachlif. So we'll say ultimately again, as we're dealing with ki asrav dimi amra b'yochanan makom she'in ba'arbala b'ala mutal mir shosayachid umir shosam lekasif alav. So we'll say 1 second, but let's analyze this for just a moment. But if you have an area that is less than, so we'll say, now what we're assuming is the machlokes between the Rabban and Shimon Gamliel is the definition of a makom p'tur. According to Shimon Gamliel, the definition of makom p'tur is any area less than dalid. According to the Rabbanan, a makom p'tur is any area less than gimel. But if it's more than gimel, that is not a makom p'tur. So the Gemara says, really? So the Gemara says, "V'ha ki asrav dimi amra b'yochanan makom she'ein ba'arbal al arbal." We learned this before, that if you have an area that's less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, say this was the paradigmatic case, was like a post. You have a post or a pillar that is 10 tefachim high, but is not dalid al dalid. And I will say, imagine for a moment that post is right in between the Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah. So what's the halacha with that post? Both the Bnei Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah have the ability to adjust their load on it. Ubilvat shelo yachlifu. And I will say, as long as what? As long as they don't go ahead and exploit that area to transfer items between one domain and the other. So this is pretty explicit. What's the shear of a makom p'tur? What's the shear? Dalet tfachim, which would seem to support the position of Rav Shimon Gamliel and against the Rabbanan. To which the Gemara says, here's the difference. Hasam reshuyos d'oraisa. So I will say there you're dealing with biblical reshuyos. Reshus hayachid. Hacha amud beis. Hacha reshuyos d'Rabbanan. But say here we're dealing with rabbinic reshuyos. And I will say this goes back to what we said before, that it could very well be that when it comes, we assume that people are more careful when it comes to biblical domains and are more willing to push the envelope when it comes to rabbinic domains. So it could very well be that although the shear for a makom p'tur, when it comes to biblical domains, will be dalet tfachim, it could very well be that when we're dealing with rabbinic domains, we're going to have to be more machmir and say, no, a makom p'tur is only less than gimel tfachim. I, v'hara b'yochanan, B'Rishuyos Dirabanan Nami Amar. But Rabbi Yochanan also held by Rishuyos Dirabanan that the definition of a makom p'tur is 3 tefachim or less. After all this, because we learned kosel shebein beis chatzeros. We'll say if you have a wall in between two chatzeros, gavoy tefachim v'rochav arba, and I will say the wall is 10 tefachim tall and has a width of 4 tefachim. Ma'arvin shnayim ve'in ma'arvin echas. Well, so remember again, we saw this case before. If you have a wall that's 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide, that is a bona fide partition, making the two chatzeros 2 separate domains. They cannot make one joint eruv. Halacha l'maaseh, they can only make 2 independent eruvim. However, hayu barosh, and therefore hayu barosh peros, and therefore we'll say if there's fruit on top of the wall of this chatzer, elu olin mikan va'ochlin ve'elu olin mikan va'ochlin. We'll say each one has the right to go up to the wall and eat on the top of the wall. But remember, neither is permitted to bring anything up to the wall or bring anything down from the wall. Nifrat zakosel. What happens if the wall was breached? Ad eser amos ma'arvin shnayim. So we'll say if the breach was less than 10 amos, they still have the ability to make 2 independent eruvim. But bimrotzu ma'arvin echa. But if they want to make 1 eruv, they have the ability to do that as well. So the Gemara says, Mipnei shuke pesach, because ultimately, again, a breach of 10 amos or more, or I should say within 10 amos or less, is like an opening. So we'll say, we saw this before, right? If the breach is 10 amos or less, then Allah Kalamaisa, that's an opening, but they have a choice. They could make 1 joint eruv or 2 separate eruvim. Yoser mikan, but ultimately, again, 10 amos or more, ma'arvin echad ve'in ma'arvin shnayim. Ultimately, again, they have to make 1 joint eruv, cannot make 2 independent eruvim. And we spoke about this. Ein bo arba mai. We'll say, what happens if the top of the wall does not have 4 tefachim? So the Gemara says, Amarav avir beis rishuyos sholetes bo. We'll say if the top of the wall is not 4 tefachim in width, then what? Then we'll say the lashon of the brisa was the airspace of both chatzeros kind of overtakes that top, and therefore what? Lo yaziz bo malinema. You can't move anything on top of the wall. So we'll say, Rabbi Yochanan says, Elu malin mikan va'ochlin ve'elu malin mikan va'ochlin. Rabbi Yochanan says, Halacha l'maisa, if the top of the wall is less than 4 tefachim, Rabbi Yochanan says that is a makom p'tur, and because it's a makom p'tur, pretty much anyone could take whatever they want to the top of the chatzar and move it down from the top of the chatzar and shalom al Yisrael. But as Rabbi Yochanan tamei, Rabbi Yochanan goes according to his reasoning. Why? Dichi asr avdimi am Rabbi Yochanan makom she'ein bo arba al arba mutal ibnei rosh hashanah l'rosh hashanah lekasef alav obilvad shelo yachlifu. So we'll say Rabbi Yochanan says that halacha l'maisa that what? That if you have a post that is 10 tefachim high, but not 4 tefachim in area, and that post is in between Rosh Hashanah, both the members of the Rosh Hashanah and the Rosh Hashanah may utilize that post to go and adjust their load, as long as they don't exploit that post to go ahead and transfer items between one Rosh Hashanah. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? You see from here that Rabbi Yochanan holds that the definition of a makom p'tur is dalet tefachim, both by Rishuyos D'Oraisa and Rishuyos D'Rabbanan. Because also remember again, what we just said over here, before we got to the post, the case of the wall in between 2 chatzeros. So we'll say, remember, when you're dealing with the status of the top of the wall in between 2 chatzeros, those are Rishuyos D'Rabbanan, right? This is not Dora. It says these are D'Rabbanan. And yeah, but what did Rabbi Yochanan say? If the wall is less than dalet tefachim in width, that top of the wall is a makom p'tur. So pretty much anyone could use it for anything. And as we'll say, now you see Rabbi Yochanan going on record saying that the definition of a makom p'tur by Rishuyos D'Oraisa is less than dal tefachim. That's the case of the post. And now we see Rabbi Yochanan going on record as saying that by Rishuyos D'Rabbanan, the definition of a makom p'tur is less than dal tefachim. So I will say, so remember again, let's just stop for just a moment. We wanted to suggest that before, that halacha l'maisa, the way to go ahead and that we wanted to suggest that it could very well be that the definition of makom p'tur will be different for Rishuyos D'Rabbanan and Rishuyos D'Oraisa. Then maybe for Rishuyos D'Oraisa, definition of makom p'tur is any area less than dalet tefachim. But for Rishuyos D'Rabbanan, we're going to be more machmir and say no, the definition of makom p'tur is what Rabbi saying, only less than gimel tefachim. But here we see that halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yochanan is defining makom p'tur the same way by Rishuyos Doraisa and Rishuyos D'Rabbanan, to which the Gemara says, you're right. Hahu Zi'iri Amra. So I'll say ultimately, again, it's another opinion. Look at Rashi. Hahu De'ilu Ma'alin Mikan, De'ilu Ma'alin Mikan, Demasha Aval Lachlu Feilo, Zi'iri Amra, Shed Rabbi Yochanan, Aval Rav Dimi Ali Rabbi Yochanan Motor Lahachlif. So we'll say, it's another opinion. Enochinam, you're right, that's the opinion of Zi'iri. Or the Zi'iri Kashya. So we'll say, but the same problem is going to come up according to Zi'iri. In other words, we'll say, just because you're attributing the opinion to someone else doesn't change the mitzvahs that there's still contradictory ideas. Zi'iri mokim la ba'ama samaim gufa. So we'll say, interestingly enough, Zi'iri understands that when there was a discussion about pachos mi gimla, pachos mi dalid, that discussion was not about the banks of the river, about the stream, but rather about the stream itself. The Rav Dimi Tanoihi, and ultimately, again, the statement of Rav Dimi. Shabbos, so listen to this. So what the Gemara is suggesting now is as follows. Up until now, we assumed that if there's one thing that no one disagrees with, it's the dimensions of a carmelis. That a carmelis is 4 tefachim wide, 10 tefachim deep, right? 10 tefachim right in height. That's what we always assumed. Now the Gemara is suggesting no. That's a machlokes too. Not only is there a machlokes about ultimately, again, the size of a makom ptur, the dimensions, but there's also machlokes regarding the dimensions of a carmelis. Wow. And therefore, Abosai, the brisa before that spoke about, again, pachos mi daled, pachos mi gimel, may not be speaking about the banks of the river, but may actually be speaking about the actual dimensions of the river itself. I v'tehavi kechuri carmelis, but Abosai, why don't you go ahead and treat the river that runs through the chutzner, literally again, we'll say like the crevices of a carmelis. So we'll say, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. V'tihavi kechori carmelis. Rashi says, "Hi ama afilu les ba shir carmelis lissar mishum chori carmelis." Well, this is very interesting. Why don't we say as follows? Why don't we go ahead and say that even if the river that runs through, we'll say to illustrate this, by the way, you could take a look at picture 308. So we'll say, if you notice the following, what's happening in 308. You have a river that is much larger in the area outside of the chutzner, right? I will say you can see that, right? So the river is much larger outside and it gets more narrow inside the chutzner itself. So we'll say there's a concept that's called chori carmelis. Chori carmelis means the crevices of a carmelis, which means if something is part of a carmelis, a larger carmelis, even if it subsequently becomes smaller, we view it as part of the bigger entity. And therefore, even if in some areas it lacks the dimensions, it's quote unquote still part of the mothership. So we'll say, so why don't you say as follows? Even if the river, when it flows inside the chutzner, doesn't have the requisite measurements of a carmelis, we don't view that part of the mothership river, then if the mothership has the dimensions, even the smaller part should be considered as if they have the dimensions as well. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, Tehavi kechori carmelis, hi amo, afilu les bashir carmelis, lisser mishum chori carmelis, keichidarim mesech Shabbos, chorish sarabim kirshtabos. Just like we said before, that the crevices of the Rosh Hashanah are like the Rosh Hashanah. So why don't you say the same thing over here? Let the river be treated like chori carmelis. Let's just finish. Abai. So the Gemara says, Abai bar Rabbi Chanina bar Avinami Tarvayu ein chor in the carmelis. No, I both say there's no such thing as crevices of a carmelis. In other words, chorim, crevices, or say, if you can imagine, the chorim are like the appendages of any particular rishus. That's a din in Rishuyos Daraisa. So you can have chorei Rishus Harabim, but there's no such thing as chorei carmelis. Rav Ashkemar afilu temi yesh chor in the carmelis. You could even say no, there are crevices to the carmelis. Hani mili b'smucha. That's only when the chorim are close to the actual carmelis. Hacha b'mufleges. But I will say in this case over here, ultimately again, the narrow part of the river that runs through the chutzner is far away from the larger part of the carmelis. Ravina Amar kigon da'abid le nifke apuma. So let's listen to this. What's the case in the Mishnah? Also, with this, we'll have to conclude. The case over here is where you made nifke. So we'll say, if you want to see this, this is picture 309. Now, what's the case here, Rabbi saying? We're at the entranceway, the exit of the chutzner. Underneath the walls, you made these two mechitzas. So, Rabbi say, if you notice over here, not a solid mechitza, but like two posts at each side of the river. Those are called nifke. So, Rabbi say, look at Rashi. Ba'puma, b'kniso b'yitzia, V'hischil hamechitza samoch la'agafea b'soch ognea mikan u'mikan v'lo chibra be'emsa shimayim nichnas v'yotin derech sham v'rei Rabbanan tabachos megimel amrina lavod aval gimel amrina lavod. So we'll say, watch this. So we'll say very quickly, just to conclude, what's the case? Finally, we say, what's the case? So we'll say, and what was the Brisa talking about? Pachos min gimel, pachos min dalet. Here's the case. I will say the case in question over here. Remember, let's take one step back very quickly. Machlokes Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda and Mishnah. The core machlokes I will say is what? When you have a river that runs through a chutzner, and that chutzner is walled off, Rabbi Yehuda says there is no additional mechitza necessary for the water. Why not? According to Rabbi Yehuda, why not? Why not? Because we view the primary wall as extending now. Whereas Rabbanan say no. You must make an additional mechitza for the water. To which the Gemara says, you know what the mechitza you made over here, both sides? The mechitza is, if you notice again, the mechitza was picture page 309. Underneath the primary wall, you made two wood protrusions. But what happened? The middle between those two wood protrusions was open. So both say, does that work as a mechitza for the water? So the Gemara says, what? It depends. It depends how large the opening in between the two wood posts are. And I will say, it's a fundamental machlokes. Watch this in lavud. In lavud, machlokes in lavud, the Rabbanan hold the definition of lavud is less than 3 tfachim. So as long as the opening in between the two wooden extensions is less than 3 tfachim, that's a bona fide mechitza and it works. Rabbi say, amazingly enough, Reb Shimon disagrees with Reb Shimon holds that no, the concept of lavud applies to anything less than dalit tfachim. So Rabbi say, it turns out that it's the yisodistic machlokes in lavud itself. The Rabbanan saying, as long as the area in between the two wooden extensions is less than 3 tfachim, the mechitza works, the water source is closed off. Reb Shimon is saying, no, even less than 4 tfachim, lavud will work. All right, so we'll stop over here, Meretz Hashem, pick up with the Mishnah tomorrow.